Hey, welcome back to Mocktails with Marina. I'm your host, Marina, and today we've got Kavatender extraordinaire Ariana Foshag, former Kavatender and longtime consumer, joining us to discuss Kavatender stories and why we do what we do. I'm so excited to dive right in and learn so much more, so let's get right into it. Thank you so much for joining us today, Ariana. I've got some questions here, but we've got time and space to explore whatever comes up. So, how are you doing today? Thank you for being here.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me. I'm doing great. It's a nice, rainy, chill day in Phoenix, and I'm just ready to get right into it. I'm so glad to be here.
Heck yeah. Let's just dive right in. And for those of you who are listening and don't know what kava tenders are, it's basically a bartender at a kava bar, right? It's not quite appropriate to call them a barista because they don't do the same, like they don't make coffee. I mean, some kava bars might have coffee, but for the most part, kava tender is a very special kind of job description here. And we'll kind of dive deeply into it and through a different couple sets of perspectives here. But let's start by asking Ariana, why did you want to become a kava tender in the first place?
So there's a lot of reasons. I'm not gonna lie. Like when I first found out about Kava, I always thought like, man, this would be the coolest job to have. Like I come from a really big service background. Like I'm still a bartender today, not a Kava tender anymore. Because unfortunately, like there's not a lot of Kava bars in the area, at least ones that are hiring. But I will say I've always been super interested in just like the kava bar atmosphere. I always thought it would be such a great work environment because you get all of this, like the benefits that you get from bartending. You get to talk to people, you get to meet people. You're basically like everything behind the bar. You're an entertainer, you're a server, you're a bartender, but all of that cuts out the alcohol. And as someone who has been sober for almost coming on to 2 years now, I definitely did not want to work in an environment that had alcohol in it, just like for my own like mental health. I didn't know how that would affect me. Luckily, I'm kind of getting out of that, so it doesn't affect me that much right now. But I will say, like, something about being a kava tender always seemed so interesting to me. And I loved the community. I loved getting to hear everybody's stories. And it was a really big people thing. I feel like as kava tenders, we have the ability to help people through their sobriety journeys, whether it be in a direct or an indirect way.
Yeah, I love that. And I love that you mention so much about the community because a lot of other service industry jobs, like, you'll have regulars, but it's not exactly a community of regulars. And that's what I think is so different about kava bars. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that there's a lot of people here on their sobriety journey. So, by the way, congrats on hitting almost 2 years. That's really impressive and amazing.
Thank you.
Hell yeah. And I think that it's an important thing to talk about because anytime I put a job listing up for hiring kava tenders in the past, it was always really important for me at least to put on there like, hey, this is not an entry level position because like you need at least a year experience on either making drinks like as a barista or a bartender and just basically having that muscle memory down because when you're entering a kava bar space, people are not drunk. They're much more aware and people are also not like at coffee shops, people mostly kind of stick to themselves. Like some have community where they chit chat a little bit, but for the most part, everyone's wearing headphones. Everybody's working on whatever they're doing. And it's like people almost, I don't know, it's just not as easy to just randomly start talking to people. Whereas Kava really lends itself to that. So I would love to hear some stories about, just in general, what it's like to specifically be around, more sober people and specifically, the people that came in on your shifts that are like, "Hey, I just got out of rehab or I just, I'm having a hard time with my sobriety, so here I am." Like I'd love to hear your stories that encapsulate the sobriety journey.
I absolutely love how you mentioned that it's nothing like when you're serving alcohol or coffee, because something that whenever I was training people on how to be a kava tender, one of the first things that I always said is you really got to check your energy levels because unlike a cafe, when somebody already knows like, oh, I just want a latte, or they're coming to a bar, maybe they'll look at your cocktail menu, maybe they'll look at the beer menu, and they already kind of have an idea of what they want. But something that I noticed, and this is from experiencing multiple kava bars, is a lot of the time people who come into kava bars, they don't just want the kava, but they also want the experience. So I always say, like, make sure that you watch your energy, watch how you're talking to people, because something that kava does is it makes you hyper aware of your surroundings, especially the people who are in recovery, who did just get out of rehab, who are on their journeys. They can notice the energy a lot more clear than somebody who might be under the influence. So, whereas if you're used to serving people drinks with alcohol, you might get away with saying some things that you probably can't say in a kava bar because it could rub people the wrong way. They don't have that like inhibitions taken down due to the alcohol or anything of that sort. It's like they're hyper aware. So something that I notice that's a big difference, like serving people with kava, is you have to be very present with them. And as somebody who is a barista and a bartender now, just at a traditional coffee shop and bar, the conversations that you have with people in a kava bar often are a lot more, they're more in depth, especially when you have people coming in who don't know what the product is. I've never had to explain someone what coffee is, but I can't even count the amount of times where I've had to, tell them what the product is, how it affects them. Sometimes I would spend up to 20 minutes just with a single customer, explaining everything to them, how it works, helping them decide, because it's such, even though the like kava industry is definitely getting a lot more mainstream now, it's not mainstream to the point where people come in knowing what it is off the top of the bat. At most, maybe people have said like, "Oh, I've heard of it. Like, isn't it this?" But that's about all the information that they have. So you're basically this guide for them in this completely new experience that they're having, which is really so much different than any other thing you could be serving. And something that I noticed too about working at a kava bar is that people want to talk to you. And this was me, like when I first moved to Arizona and I did not have that many friends, I didn't have a community. What initially drew me to the kava community so much is that every time I came in, I guaranteed I would either meet somebody, talk to somebody, see somebody that I already know, and just be immersed in that community feeling, which I don't think I've ever gotten anywhere else. Like I went to cafes, but I never became friends with the baristas. Like now when I went to like the kava bar, I became friends with the kavatenders really quickly. I became friends with the community members. Everybody is so eager to get to know you and to welcome you. And I feel like that is such an amazing environment, especially for people who are on their journeys, because I can't speak for everybody, but at least when I became sober and I stopped drinking and partying, most of the friends that I had, I was still in college and they kind of, I was boring to them now. Like, oh, she doesn't drink. That's fine. We're just not going to hang out with her, which no shame on them, if I just wasn't their person anymore, and to each their own. But that feeling can be really isolating, especially in a world where, drinking and going out to bars is so normalized. It's really difficult to kind of find your people outside of that. So that's the biggest thing I noticed, at least in kava bars, is just those people, they're not just coming there for a drink, they're coming there for you. Like, you're going to be their community. And I feel like as a kava tender, that is a part of your job, is to welcome them and make sure that they come back and they feel safe in the space that you're providing to continue their journeys.
Oh, I love that you mentioned the word isolation here because the biggest difference between addiction and sobriety, I hear this all the time. My husband's always saying this to me. Addiction is when you're alone, and sobriety is when you're within community. And the coolest part about Kava, and I'll just say this over and over again, like I know that there's so many different like stress relieving, calming herbs out there. And the thing is, like, each type of herb works differently for different people, and it's good for different seasons, so on and so forth. What I've seen with kava is unlike anything else. And like you mentioned, being in coffee shops, being in these other places, it's kind of difficult to find connection because their goal is not connection. Kava tending goal is connection. And moving this conversation more to like the management perspective, backstory for everyone listening. Ariana was like my right hand girl when I was chief operations officer. So she was our lead kavatender. So not only was she kavatending full time, but she was also, hands on the ground, helping train all of the kavatenders that were coming in, and also providing like first interviews with people to like start the process, and I would complete that whole process. So I'd love to talk a little bit with you about the management aspect. So for example, when I worked in as a barista or as like in a restaurant, I've managed many different types of service industry businesses, and other places have different kinds of problems, right? Like when it comes to managing baristas, for example, or managing bartenders, you're going to have different conversations there. Whereas with kava tenders, for example, there were many staff meetings where we had to talk about how to teach people what boundaries are, how to, which, obviously you have those conversations in any workplace, but I feel like the boundary conversation becomes a little bit different with Kava because, uh, you know, some businesses, now this is going to be totally personal opinion here, and I'm sure there's going to be someone who disagrees with me, but at one point, at multiple points, we would go out of our way. Like if we ever found drugs in the building, for example, like we would go out of our way to like watch all the security cameras, figure out how it got there. And we would have conversations with community members. But because our community was so tight, because we had such a big, like regular basis that was very connected, we made sure to let them know, like, hey, here's our boundaries. Like, what the rules are. And if you break them, like, you can't hang here for 6 months. Like, you have to earn your spot at hanging out here, and not making it a place where we have, you know, making it a safe place to do drugs. Essentially, it lowers the vibe. So Ariana, I'm just really curious if you have any stories of, having to, you're working a shift and then something happens where someone else is trying to bring drugs or alcohol into the space, and how you'd have to react to that as a kava tender.
Oh, this is a great topic. I will say, as a manager at a kava bar, I feel like most of the issues that managers at like regular bars, baristas, they have to deal with they're very different. I don't think I've ever been to a cafe or a bar where they've had to, like tell people like, hey, you can't come on this side of the bar. You have to stay on that side. Or like, hey, like you can't bring that in here. Obviously, most places they have like no outside drink policies, but there have been multiple times on like busy nights where people come in, thinking we serve alcohol and they bring in a can. And I got to a point where I was just kind of like, all right, I'm not going to have this whole conversation. I'd literally grab their can and say, hey, you can't have alcohol. And I just throw it in the garbage right there for them. And I mean, that's like one of the more minute things. I will say, like the drug use, it was definitely something that I think eventually we toned it down a lot. But I remember in the past, like when I was just a customer at the kava bar that I was working at, it was I've overheard and saw lots of people who were, talking about drug use, and that's something that I feel can give this community a really bad rep, because for all the people who are in it for the right reasons, you also have the people who are not. And what I mean by that is no matter how good the herb or the product is, people will always find a way to like make it something that it's not. And I feel like a lot of people, they were drinking kava for the complete wrong reasons. They were using it as an outlet to maybe like transition into other drugs that, well, kava, not a drug, but transition into other supplements, I suppose you could call them, that might not be good for them. And that definitely used to be a really big issue, at least at the place that we were working at. Some of the things that I've seen, like I've found like empty packets that had powdery substances in them in the bathroom. Somebody even one time, like, dropped money in the tip jar that was, covered in a white powder. It it was very prevalent, but I feel like once you started cracking down on it, a lot of the community, because they were all so integrated, like they picked up on it and everybody kind of played a part in like being very mindful of it. So I even had like customers tell me like, hey, I noticed this happening. Maybe you should go take a look at it. Everybody kind of became on the same page. I feel like the most prevalent one was definitely people coming in very intoxicated, people coming in with open containers, and just having those conversations with them. They're never easy, but whenever I saw somebody who looked intoxicated or, was like slurring their words, slouching down, I always told them, like, hey, you don't look too well right now. I think that maybe you should come back tomorrow and then maybe we'll give you something that'll make you feel better. Because the last thing you want to do is mix kava and alcohol, first and foremost. It's not a good combination. It's going to make you super sick. But also, especially since it is a place where so many people are recovering, seeing somebody in that state of mind, seeing someone like messed up, definitely intoxicated, it's not going to make the people who are there for recovery feel very great. So there have been times too when, I had to like wake people up who were asleep on the couch and be like, hey, you can't be doing that in here. People are uncomfortable about it. And just stuff like that. And really, those were some difficult conversations to have. And I will say, like, quite a few of the people that I've had to tell, like, hey, you can't be doing that in here. You need to come back when you're feeling a little better. I haven't seen them come back. And see, that's just like a rough thing because, you always hope that maybe they will come back when they're feeling better and truly get to experience the product, but maybe it's just not their time. And I will say, like, another big boundary, and this like goes outside of like, bringing in like other substances, is I feel like because the community is so tight knit, the boundaries are very hazy. Like there are some regulars that you could definitely consider some of your best friends. Like one of my really close friends to this day is a regular at the Kava bar that I met from working there. But then you also have the people who think, because this is a close community, like, oh, so and so is working. They're my friend. I can just like go and grab my own thing from the fridge that says employees only. And maybe, and this is not on them, like maybe they forgot they grabbed it because they were there all day. And then all of a sudden we're losing money because we didn't set those boundaries. We let the people take the stuff from behind the bar. We let people go fill in their waters. And then all of a sudden, everybody thinks it's okay to, step behind the bar. Also, giving kavatenders hugs. I know some of us, we're very loving people. We give hugs to the regulars, and then all of a sudden somebody uses that as a means to get into our personal space, maybe touch us in a way that we're not comfortable with. I've had a few people that have literally stepped behind the bar trying to give me a hug, and I'm like, what are you doing? Like, you can't be back here. But then they're like, oh, well, so and so came back here and you got to, how are you going to explain that one? Like, oh, they're my friend. Like, you don't want to show favoritism. So I just feel like with all of the positive things that there are about the Kava community, I feel like it opens doors for people who maybe don't have the right boundary setting, or maybe they see the loose boundaries and they see the cracks and they try to like sneak in and like infiltrate and all that stuff. So those, I feel like those are like my biggest things with setting boundaries. And it's really just like it's up to the kavatenders to do that, because I mean, if even one kavatender is loose on their boundaries and they allow people to, grab the stuff from behind the bar, maybe they allow people to hang out after we close, they allow people to bring in their own outside drinks, whether they be like, alcohol or other drugs and stuff. And all it takes is that one person for those cracks to start showing. And then it becomes more prevalent because the people think they can push more. And once again, this is not a fault on anybody. It's just a team effort to kind of make sure that we keep the space like a safe space that it's intended to be.
Absolutely. That's the craziest thing about this space. And I feel like it took years of nuance to really uncover where it's like when you're around people who are sober and you become more aware of these things, a lot of these topics we're talking about, it's not like they don't happen in restaurants or bars or coffee shops. It's just that I feel like it shows up differently, and like especially the restaurant industry. I mean, that's rampant for just having no boundaries or crossing other people's boundaries in the workplace. And coffee is just too quick, I think, for certain things to boil to a head to the point where you actually have to deal with it. Like usually in coffee environments, people leave faster than the problem can brew. But because people are hanging out in kava bars like all day, right? Like kava bars are people's third place more so than just a Starbucks ever could be, because you can literally hang out there for hours. A lot of kava bars are actually down with you bringing your own food in, the ones that don't serve food, so that you do hang out all day. And then that's just the environment. And so being really, that's why I say it's not an entry level position. Like it's next level awareness of what's going on around you, because the moment your team's weakest link doesn't uphold one of those boundaries, something's bound to happen. The last thing I want to like kind of riff off here from what you were talking about is like, when people first come into this community, like into any kava community, and you know they're looking for this sober space. They're looking for a place to learn how to be a human again, right? Because a lot of people who are just coming into a more sober space, they remind me a lot of 21-year-olds or 18-year-olds, where it's like, if you go out in a public drunk all the time and then you go out in public for the first time sober, it's kind of like, it kind of feels like puberty all over again. You're like, oh my God, like, I don't know, like, I didn't even notice that thing about me, this, that, or the other. So people become more sensitive. So, when we talk about the drug issue, because different kava bars have different kind of SOPs on this. Some kava bars have clean needles because they're like, hey, we know people use, because kratom helps people get off of heroin addiction. So if you need needles, might as well get clean ones. To me, that's not the answer, because
No.
to me, the biggest difference between I think this is obvious, but people forget it. The biggest difference between a kavatender and, for example, a licensed therapist or pharmacist is that we don't have legal protections as kavatenders or anybody in the kava space to say anything definitive in terms of saying how to cure someone, how to treat someone. We can't even use the word pain. Like there's a lot in our marketing we can't say. What we can say are, things that are in our experience. So like, you know, I would always say behind the bar, I'd be like, look, at the end of the day, you need to do your own research and be empowered to be your own spokesperson, and maybe even talk to a trusted medical professional. But in my experience, this is how these things helped me. Like we constantly have to do these like word gymnastics just to have conversations. And we aren't trained as therapists or pharmacists. So the reason I mention all this is because this is why I believe that kava bars are the treat, not the treatment, when it comes to sobriety. So if you need treatment, you need to go to rehab. If you have gone to rehab, you've done what you need to do to, separate yourself from your addiction, your day one choice, right? You can come and hang out in the kava bar so long as you are staying true to that. The moment you bring your drugs selfishly into a kava bar where other people are trying to recover, and you know, I would always just ban those people. Like I just stopped feeling bad about
Mm-hmm.
it. I don't, even if something bad happened to them, like the reason I felt okay sleeping at night banning them was because I knew that if they brought those drugs in, more people would be hurt, more people would relapse. And I mean, not that anything's like, at the end of these conversations aren't about money, but if you want to take a look, again, we're talking about business management. Your sales increase, the more drugs decrease in your space. So it's healthier for everyone. There's so many positive reasons. And if you're worried about being a dick on pushing someone onto the street, like, hey, I got to kick you out because you're doing drugs, obviously, yes, they need help. But the thing is, you cannot help someone who doesn't want help. I love that you mentioned maybe it's just not their time yet. because when it is their time, then they can come back. They're absolutely allowed. You're not banned for life. You just can't bring those drugs into a place where people are very sensitive, very aware. They're going to see it. It's going to reflect on management. It's going to just bring the whole vibe down. And that's just not the way to be.
That's really true. And something else that I noticed, and this is just now like that I'm, a bartender at an alcohol bar. Part of my Title 4 that I had to take, which is like safe serving for alcohol and liquor in Arizona, I had to do a whole like chapter on how to spot drug usage, how to handle drug usage. And I feel like just because I've worked at other alcohol bars before too, and I have never seen drug usage at alcohol bars. But I feel like it's something that is way more common in the kava industry. And I feel like that is because it is like a place for recovery. And that's just something like super important that I feel like any kava tender needs to be aware of. Because even if you have had experience, bartending, serving, any of that sorts, you will see the biggest increase of having to deal with individuals who are, using those sorts of things at a kava bar than I feel like anybody ever would at a regular bar. And now also with kava bars, like not only is it you have to spot out drugs, but you also have to spot out alcohol. Like is someone bringing in alcohol? Like one time when I first became the lead kava tender over at the bar, I literally like I have these people who came in and who underneath the bar, under where I could see, were putting shots of vodka into their drinks. And I didn't see it. I didn't notice it. And they started like a big scene. They started making people uncomfortable, going into people's personal space. And all it would have taken is for me to notice that or for, someone to spot that out. And that situation could have been handled. So it's just, and that's not on me or the other Kavatender who was on with me, but it's more of like, it was a lesson like to be aware of your surroundings because you never know what people are bringing into the space. Like people have their purses, their backpacks, like you never know what they have. It's all about being aware and being sure that you catch it at the right time before it becomes a problem.
Absolutely. And that's the thing, right? Like you're primed in an alcohol bar to look for those things. And my whole experience of being a traveling showgirl back in the day, going through so like literally countless bars. I've worked at so many nightlife places on earth. That's why I feel comfortable saying I'm an expert. And I feel like a lot of them, because like yeah, there's going to be drugs anywhere, like they're always going to slip them in somewhere, but the alcohol bars, first off, yes, they know what to look for on the bar. Number two, we're obviously not talking about dive bars here because those are just wastelands. But number two, a lot of those bars have bouncers, whereas kava bars don't have bouncers. Kava bars are advertised as this sober space. Kava bars are, advertised in this way that makes it seem like, oh, this is like paradise. Like there can't be any, like what's drugs doing here? Like it doesn't, it's one of those things that, with hindsight, the more you learn in an unregulated industry, the more I would put more resources in those SOPs. So if you're a business manager or owner out there taking any notes from this episode so far, um, action piece of advice here: make SOPs that are like how you deal with drug or alcohol use in the bar, and also reach out. Don't be shy. Go ahead and reach out to recovery centers. If you have any trusted therapists or pharmacists that would, like, you can have a deep conversation with, to like really write out a proper SOP and say, hey, this is something that we want to be able to handle professionally and take care of people, but also we need to protect the business and protect the people who are currently in it. So do your research, go ahead and get that information out there. And that being said, we're going to now talk a little bit about proper serving sizes and understanding the roots of kava and kratom, pun
Oh,
intended,
yes.
because it's really important to make sure. Okay, we talked about taking care of the emotional aspect of being a kava tender, the emotional support of the community. Now let's talk about being a scientist behind the bar. We're mixologists. We're creating these drinks that are supposed to be good for people. And, sometimes some places don't serve things properly. So I want to make sure it's very clear here that there is a lot of information and research that is currently being done on both kava and kratom. Both of these plants have been around for thousands of years, and they've specifically been in use for thousands of years. Like, especially kava, there's a very long tradition in a lot of the Polynesian islands that that kava's been in use. And I actually just read an article that there was a strain of kava that was found in Louisiana, which is wild. So who knows if someone
That's
used it.
amazing.
I know, right? So kava is something that's just like cannabis, like it grows all over the world, like grows all over in different strains, kind of a thing. Like there's 104 varieties of kava, I believe. And all of them are going to have like different strengths and different like feelings. They typically are categorized as heady, in the body, or both. And different people are going to feel different things. So let's start by talking just about kava, then we'll get into kratom after. So, Ariana, I would love to hear from you. Have you ever honestly experienced someone overserved on kava if they were only drinking kava versus what's happened when you've served someone kava and they may have mixed it with something else in throughout their day?
Ooh, okay. I have only one instance where I have witnessed somebody, I want to say, overdose on kava. And it was when I first started working at a kava bar. So I think I was like 1 month in. I had this group of, I think there was 3 or 4 guys come in, and they were saying that they had a bachelor party later in the day. So they wanted to get a giant 64-ounce jar of our concentrated kava. And I was like, okay, cool. Yeah, here you go. Because I was under the impression they were going to bring it home. Well, they did not bring it home. They drank it right there at the bar.
Whoops.
Um, and I was like, I know Kava has a reverse tolerance. So I was like, oh, like they should be fine. It's just Kava. But then apparently before I served them, the previous Kava tender on shift already served them like 2 tsunamis each, which is like a quadruple serving of Kava. So I was not aware that they had already had like 8 servings prior to getting this jar. And I'd say they finished all of it. They drank the whole jar. They tried asking me for another one, but the way they were walking, like they looked intoxicated. Like they looked like they had just come out of a bar. So I was like, I don't think so. Like I think you like I'm sorry, like you guys, are you okay? Like do you need like some water maybe? Well, like a couple of them like went to go to the store to get like some electrolyte drinks, and like one of them was just kind of like slouched on the couch. And I don't know if they had anything before coming in, like maybe they were already hungover, maybe they had something else to drink before coming in, but from what I served them it was just kava, and that's all I thought they had. But the amount that they had, man, that was enough for a lifetime, I want to say. But that was probably like the craziest story I've ever seen of anybody with just kava. But I have had multiple people who, despite me warning them, like, hey, I wouldn't recommend mixing kava with alcohol, they ordered kava. Maybe they had a couple of drinks earlier. They didn't tell me they had drinks. And like a few minutes later, they come up being like, hey, I don't really feel too good. And I asked them like, well, did you guys have anything to eat? Do you have anything like, alcohol to drink before you come in? They're like, oh yeah, we just came over from this bar across the street. And I'm like, I told you not to mix it with alcohol. What are you doing? So it's like it's usually whenever people mix kava and alcohol. Like as somebody who drinks kava and kratom, more often than not simultaneously, it is a great combination. I have never gotten sick off of mixing kava and kratom together. I think the two balance each other out to like this perfect blend of like
Mm.
energy, but that relaxation. So you don't feel too hyped up, but you also feel like you can just take on the world and you're at ease. But I will say, kava is a picky herb. Let's just say it doesn't get along with things very well, especially if that thing is alcohol. So
Hmm.
I've definitely witnessed plenty of occasions where, despite my warnings, I have had people who, drink or, they have kava and then an hour later they're like, oh, it's gone, even though kava takes about 3 hours to fully get out of your system. They go and have a drink and then all of a sudden they're throwing up off of this one drink that they got. Now, not to be confused with kratom, because from what I heard is that kratom, it doesn't necessarily mix that badly with alcohol. It decreases your alcohol tolerance, but it doesn't inherently like make you sick. So I feel like sometimes people might mix the two, thinking that kava has that same effect, like similar with that reverse tolerance. Definitely had people who thought that kratom has a reverse tolerance when they first started drinking it, myself included. But because most kava bars often sell both of the herbs, people can probably get them mixed up. So I feel like that's something that, at least if you are like kava tending a lot, especially to really let people know the difference. Like, hey guys, like, if you are drinking later, make sure that you don't drink kava or like wait like 3 hours before doing so, or well, just don't go drinking is the right answer. But sometimes people it, they're not exactly in that journey of their life yet. So always giving them the right resources and tools to help them with the experience, because I feel like a bad serving, a wrong serving size, a bad batch, a bad that's enough to turn someone away and never want to come back.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So key. Education needs to be at the forefront. If you have a kava bar and you're listening to this, or you're serving any of these botanicals, make education a pillar of your business. You're not just making SOPs to cover your legal booty. You're doing so in order to, educate your community and ensure that they're getting the right thing. I also love that you mentioned that there's only like one story that comes to mind about kava, because kava is a very special plant. When we talk about that bachelor party, so the reason that they started to feel that way, now this is the super interesting part. It's because, so you mentioned that they both had two tsunamis each before. Now, the way that that kava bar served things is they would make all of their kava very concentrated and then would add extracts at the end. And if you're drinking nothing but concentrate and extract, that will automatically, like, no matter what strain, like of those 103 different varieties of kava, it doesn't matter which one you drink. If you drink it at high concentrations, you're gonna feel more sedated. You're gonna feel more like don't drive a car. Like you're gonna slump over a little bit. Personally, it makes me feel like I actually get pretty irate because I hate feeling that way. So it actually also makes me
Same.
irritable. But
Mm-hmm.
and there was a kava bar Tyler and I recently went to that tried to make this product like kava lean, where it's like literally so concentrated, and it made me hungover for the entire, like I had it on a Friday. Saturday was completely blown. Like anyone who knows me knows I'm kind of an alcoholic. Wow. Workaholic. I I love my job. I love doing this. I'm working every day in some capacity, but when I was drinking that kava, I couldn't work. I couldn't look at a screen. I could only watch like dumb TV. Like I it was so heavy to lift my arm. And that is not only does that like is that not in the spirit of kava, and making your product the strongest possible to make you like look better to your competitors actually makes you look like a novice that doesn't care about anyone. Because let me tell you how much my self-esteem went down every time that I had any kava that made me feel drunk in some way, because it was overserved to me. And by overserve, I'm not talking about the amount of grams, because had those people that Ariana was talking about, that bachelor party, had they consumed that many grams of kratom, but it was served in with more water. So they had to drink more water the whole time. That would have been enough to help them not feel that way. Honestly, literally, it came down to if they were drinking more water with that kava and the kava was not in such a concentrated form, it would have allowed the medicine to work in the way that it's supposed to. It would have made them feel more of an uplifted calm than that sedated kind of worrisome feeling. And it also comes down to the fact that there's two different kinds of kava. There's noble kava, and then I always say the other one wrong. I feel like it's like tulsi. I always say it so wrong though. So sorry, people listening. But if you download my free kava and kratom guide that launches today, as of this recording dropping, then you'll get to see all of the information on this. But basically, noble kava is the only kava you should be drinking. The other kind is it's basically like lower quality, harder for your liver, makes you feel more of that sedated kind of feeling. And the last thing I want to mention here is it's really important to get your kava from a reputable source that knows what they're doing. Because if you accidentally, like if someone's just being lazy or cheap, and they try to give you the kava leaf, that's toxic. That will hurt you. Like all of the studies in the past that like really ruined kava in the like in public perception for a while was the fact that these dumb researchers literally had no idea that you only drink the stupid fucking roots. Like they were serving people in these studies, they were serving them the twigs and the leaves. And a lot of these people already outside of this study were drinking alcohol and doing things that were terrible for their liver. So when the study ended and they were like, oh, well, look at all these people who are sick and whose livers are more damaged. Well, yeah, because they're drinking alcohol. You told them to never, like, you never told them to not drink alcohol during the study, and you're serving them the shit part of the leaf. Like, you're literally trying to kill them at that point. So all of that research study was completely like shown to be inaccurate. People who like especially there was a study done on Fijians who've drank a lot of kava, like I'm talking grams on grams on grams every day for years, and not even just years but generations. And do you want to know how many of them had any sort of like liver cancer? None of them.
None.
None. So it's all about how you are serving kava in order to do that one safely. Last thing I want to mention here, though, if you puke on kava, that's kava having your back. That's kava just pushing out anything that should not be there. Once you puke, if you're not feeling good on kava, you're good. Like you don't have to go to a hospital. The only time you'd have to go to a hospital is if you have an allergy to a pepper plant. But in that case, you should have never drank kava because it's a pepper.
That's true.
Let's talk about kratom. I want to hear you to chat with me about your experience serving kratom, both positively and when there are just dumb people. I don't want to call them dumb people. That's me being smart ass mouth. But you know, people who are abusing the kratom and you know drinking it in a bad way. I'd love to hear your kavatending stories here.
Oh God, I have so many of this. I will say, so I always like to say like Kava is like, like it's the angel. Like it's very difficult to abuse Kava. Like I feel like you have to try to abuse Kava. Like you purposely need to take way more than recommended. Like honestly, it's so like, and I'm not speaking this as like a universal like way of looking at it because anybody can have too much if served by the wrong person. But I feel like kava, you have to really put in effort if you want to use it the wrong way. Kratom is a little more finicky. Kratom is picky. Kratom, you can have too much based on a variety of things. Like so many factors play into how kratom affects you. Like, did you eat that day? How much water did you drink? How was it brewed? What vein is it? And especially if you have any sort of like neurodivergency, like I have ADHD. Personally, green kratom, it messes with me so bad. Every
Same.
time I've had green kratom, man, it makes me anxious. I can't focus at all. It makes me want to sleep. But then, for example, like yellow kratom, which is known to be more like chill, more euphoric, that one gives me energy. Like I have yellow kratom, I feel like I can take on the world. So it's definitely something that you have to be so much more conscious of Kavatender. Like I would never cut someone off from Kava. I mean, unless they have like two 64-ounce jars, then yeah, probably. But Kratom, you can really see the effects starting to come in. And I've been drinking Kratom for 3 years now. So I've had my fair share of experiences with it. Like I've had really great experiences. I've had a couple really crappy ones. And the biggest one, like just from my personal experience, is when I was not told that Kratom, does not have the same reverse tolerance as Kava does. So my first time that I ever tried Kratom, I had four doubles,
Whoops.
which is 8 times the recommended serving size. And I didn't have like, I mean, it wasn't the worst experience. Like I was definitely nodding off. I felt like I didn't feel impaired, but I felt like I was getting there. And I slept for 16 hours straight. Like I literally just slept it off.
Whew.
And honestly, it was the best sleep of my life. I can't even lie. That was some refreshing sleep. Would I do it again? Definitely not. Just wasted a whole day. But it definitely can be, I feel like Kratom can be drinking and access way easier than Kava can. And I remember when we were carrying this product, Nature 9, and there's so many stories about this. So if
Barf.
you guys, I know, like if y'all haven't tried Nature 9, you're not missing anything. I actually just had another like negative experience with their products a couple of days ago, which I'll get into in a second. But where this was going is they do not monitor how much extract or product is in their cans. Like there's something up with their process where sometimes there is the perfect amount, sometimes there's barely any, and then sometimes there's way too much. And I feel like that is like a perfect example of like how just being served the wrong amount can completely ruin your experience. Because if the Kratom isn't potent enough, you're going to try it and you're going to be like, what's the hype around this? I don't feel like I did anything. I just drank something that tasted like tea and I feel the same. But then if you have a little too much of it, let's just say whoever brewed it or whoever made it accidentally miscalculated the recipe, or who knows, maybe they didn't even measure it. They just threw a scoop in there, mixed it up, and gave it to you, which I've had that happen to me before. And you gave them way more than they should have, especially if it was their first time. And then they throw up, they feel wheezy. And something about Kratom, it's like you can either sleep it off or it can keep you awake. And you can get this like icky, gross feeling that even if you puke, it doesn't go away. Like you still feel nauseous. Like you could be puking for hours and just wait for the effects to wear off. Drink water, eat food, do everything you can do, but it's honestly just a waiting game. So that's why I feel like with Kratom, you need to take so much like responsibility and making sure that you know what you are serving people, because all it takes is an extra gram to make someone's day, like just to ruin their day. And going back to Mitra, so the other day I went to the little corner market and there was actually a rep for Mitra 9 there. And she asked me like, "Oh, what do you think of this product?" And I was like, "I don't like it." I'm gonna be so real with you. Like I have tried it multiple times. I've had really bad experiences, but she was saying how like they went through a rebrand. So I was like, you know what? I'll try it again. Why not? So I got one and I actually felt great off of it. It was the perfect level of energy. I felt really good. And I was like, oh my God, maybe they switched it up. So the next day I go and get another one. And off of half of the can, I was puking on my shift at work. Half
No.
of the can. And
Mm.
I was like, yep, they did not fix this. And that's like exactly all it takes is like that first can, perfect amount. That second can, they must have done something to it. And that's the problem when it comes to mass producing kratom. Unless you are so like purposeful in your brand that you make sure that you have a consistent product, it's not like it's not like anything else. Like if you accidentally add a little too much sugar into this Diet Coke, or if you accidentally add a little extra this, it's not one of those ingredients where you can be inconsistent.
Hmm.
all it takes is like the smallest like wrong serving of kratom to turn someone away from it forever, and they never want to go back to it. And they're missing out on something that could potentially help them in so many different aspects of their like health journeys, their sobriety journeys, but somebody was irresponsible with serving them and they don't want anything to do with it. Same with like, smoke shops, they sell kratom capsules. I will say this until I die, never buy the capsules from a smoke shop. I don't know
Amen.
what's in those. It's not kratom. I don't know what it
Mm-mm.
is.
Some
Just
weird
don't buy them.
stimulant or something. Ugh. Yeah, great points here. And really, really important to make sure that when you are buying your kratom from wherever you're buying it, um, ask for a COA. So certificate of analysis. If you're a business owner, if someone doesn't give you a COA or they want you to buy a sample or anything like that, just say no. Just know that that's not a good or reputable kratom, or really any sort of distributor. No distributor should be like secretive on that kind of like important information. But also make sure that you do as much research as you can by understanding that kratom is going to affect different people differently. Just like Ariana mentioned, green can make some neurodivergent people feel super not good. Other people love green kratom. Um, it all comes down to technique. So I do have a free brew guide that is up on the website right now. Go ahead and download that. It has information from both Calm with Kava and the American Kratom Association and their recommendations on how to go about, consuming kava and kratom and just understanding a little bit more about it. And one last note I want to mention here about kratom is just that it doesn't have to do with, like, yes, grams are incredibly important, but if you are, like Ariana said, if you're just throwing powder into water and serving it, it's going to make you vom. You got to make sure that you're processing it right and you're brewing it right. If you're consuming an extract, you have to make sure that the extract was created, in a proper manner. Make sure that, by the way, if you smell anything metallic, just throw that kratom away. Metallic is a sign that the person who, or, the company that was processing the kratom leaves were not following like GMPs, proper like manufacturing processes, which may have caused heavy metals to enter the kratom, which can also make you feel bad without any stimulants being added to it. But also, if the mold and the bacteria are not being regulated in the facility that the kratom is being processed in, that will also make you sick. Same with any product on planet Earth, but just know kava and kratom are not as regulated. Like, in fact, kava I don't think is really regulated at all, but kratom, only some states have some regulation. A lot of bad actors can slip through. So again, go ahead and download that guide for more information. I also have a lot of advice for people when it comes to how to, do the guinea pigging on yourself, right? We'll talk more about that in a future episode. I just want to give Ariana one final question here. What is your best piece of advice for people who want to try kava or kratom?
Definitely do your research. Like, I can give all of my own personal testimonies because these are products that honestly have changed my life, like without me even trying to change it. Like, I didn't try to get sober. Like, just drinking this, like, it made me have no desire to drink alcohol anymore. But it all comes down to your own research. Like Marina was saying earlier, we are kavatenders. They're not pharmacists. They can be as expert as they can, but there's no certification for being an expert in kratom or kava. There's no sort of course like that you can take that is going to give you all the knowledge. And just like everything affects different people differently. So always do your research, like make sure that you go to a reputable spot. I always recommend like going to a kava bar the first time so you have somebody who understands the product to serve you the first time. Ask questions, never worry about being annoying because I've had so many people say like I'm so sorry, like I'm being annoying. Like no, please ask all the questions that you need because the last thing I would want is for you not to ask a question and then have a bad experience because of it. So
Mm-hmm.
just make sure and also read the reviews of the kava bar because another thing, like because people are so like receptive to the energy at a kava bar. They're going to be a lot more like open and honest in the reviews. So read the reviews, like make sure that nobody, even if a couple people are like, oh, this made me feel sick, like, yes, obviously a few people are going to feel sick, but as long as the majority of them are all good, like, then you know you have a right spot. And if you are ordering it online, make sure that, just like Marina said as well, ask for their like molecular breakdown of everything, read their reviews as well. Never go by price, because yes, you don't want to spend a lot of money on something. Like, I totally get that. I'm all about saving money myself. But oftentimes, like if a product is more on the pricey side, like it's probably going to be better quality. Just like the kava, there's like a higher end kava, there's a lower end kava. So when it comes to putting these like plant medicines in your body, you're not going to go and like get knockoff freaking drugs on the street. Like, you're going to go to a pharmacist. So think of it in a similar context. Like, you want the good quality. So just research, quality, questions. That's the best route of going for it.
Hell yeah. Thank you so much for all of your expertise, your time, and all the information you bring to the table, Ariana. I'm sure this is not going to be the one and only time we'll hear from you. So if
I
anybody
hope
else,
not.
oh, we know not. So if anybody has any questions, they listen to this episode and they're like, oh my goodness, I want to learn more. Or, you have an interesting thought that was sparked from any of these stories, please, please, please do not hesitate to reach out. Send an email at hello@marinamars.com. Even if those questions are for Ariana, I will definitely forward them over to her as well. And just stay tuned because we're going to have more Kavatender stories coming your way. The guide for brewing kava and kratom will be in the description of this episode. And as always, let me know if you need anything. Thank you so much, Ariana.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.